So we would like to welcome everyone today for the museum's History for Lunch. We are trying to have it at our normal time, which would be the first Wednesday of the month at 12 noon, and we're just so glad that everyone could join us today. This is only our second Zoom program that we have had for the museum with the COVID-19. So we are still learning through all these technical difficulties, and we're trying, hopefully we improve with each presentation so that we can eventually master this. Hopefully we'll have it mastered before we welcome everybody back to the museum, which we're hoping that we can start welcome everyone back to the museum in July. We're going to go ahead today. So we have Chris Meekins with us. He works for North Carolina Archives, and he is a native of Elizabeth City. So anytime that we call Chris, he just more than willingly volunteers to help us out. And today he is helping us out with a very popular topic for the Pasquotank County and the surrounding areas on Nell Cropsey. So Chris, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. But before I do, if everyone would just stay muted, at the bottom of your screen, we have a Q&A. So if you have a question for Chris, we will try our best to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. We are going to record the presentation, so if you have some friends that would like to see it at a later time, we will post on our website for the museum and on our social media sites where you can go to locate the presentation. Also, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to launch a poll. So if you don't mind, all the visitors, if you don't mind answering those questions, we would greatly appreciate it, because again, it's only 3 questions, but we're just trying to learn our way through all of this new technology. And if you can help us out in any way, that would be great. So Chris, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you today.
All right, thanks, Lori. Thanks for inviting me. And I am always happy to help out. You can see, folks, that your local museum is in the forefront of media technology and sharing stuff. So we're right on the cutting edge today. This is a new program for me, and I had a slight family emergency this week with my mother-in-law and helping her out. So I haven't had a whole lot of time to polish it. I will apologize for that as we go through it. Now, I was just telling Lori earlier, I can't remember when I didn't know something about the Nell Cropsey story. It just seems if you're born in that city, you seem to just know it by infusion. But for folks that don't know the Nell Cropsey story, Nell obviously disappeared in Elizabeth City in November of 1901, November 20th. And it was later discovered on December 27th that she had been murdered because they found her dead body in the water. But the time between those 2 points, there was an immense media sensation. It was likely the first of its kind. I haven't seen anything quite like that in other stories that I've looked at. Up and down the East Coast, across all the way out to Oregon. It just was a story that gripped the nation. And the question is, you know, obviously it's a gripping story, a young lady gone missing, her boyfriend charged with a possible crime, but, you know, why was the media so taken by it and what was going on? And I think maybe as we look through some of the headlines and some of the media and what's going on, we might discover a little bit of the story behind the story on that. So also, I'll say this presentation, I'm in a particular mode on an older computer, and it seems like I can only go in one direction. So I can't go back to a slide and talk about it. I apologize for that, because sometimes I do that in a presentation. I won't be able to do that today. So the first slide, let's see if we can get there. This is from a 1923 Sanborn map, but it's the entirety of Riverside Avenue. The right of your screen ends about where what was the COA when I was growing up, but I think now is an apartment complex there at the end of Riverside Avenue. And then all the way to your left is Charles Creek. If you look down to the bottom of the screen, that big open area with the little creek that runs across it, was known as the Cabbage Patch, and Bartlett Avenue is there. That's where I grew up. It's nothing there in this picture, but I am an original Cabbage Patch kid, I like to tell people. So we run all the way, you can see this is Riverside Avenue all the way here. The reason I include this is the Cropsey house is down here, and on the other side of Riverside Avenue, and we're going to take a look at that right now, will be Wilcox's house. And the action the evening after he and Nell spoke, and then no one saw Nell again, occurs mainly along this road. And then if we pick this up, if you look down at the bottom of the map, you see this is Riverside Avenue coming in. And here is Charles Creek. It goes straight into Shepherd Street. I think this is the area where the museum is located now. But somewhere along in here was Wilcox's house. So not a great distance. So Nell disappeared on the night of November 20th, 1901, sometime after 11:05 p.m. Once the family had figured out she was missing, they immediately sought out Jim Wilcox, her beau of the last few years. They woke Jim up early in the morning of the November 21st, and when he did not satisfactorily answer their questions, they went to the chief of police, who then went back to Jim. Jim was taken to the Cropsey house, where he was interviewed by the family. Swearing he did not know where Nell could be, Jim was allowed to leave. He never changed his story from that statement. Immediately, the story broke in the media. Here, the Richmond paper is relating the next day's news. The search for Nell was on, and the media would play a big role. I understand if you're seeing me in a small window, you can move me around. You might want to move me to the lower part of your screen on the left, because most of the titles are going to appear up on the right side of the screen. Here we see an Atlanta paper, same day, November 22nd. So there, and the date line is November 21st. This news story broke immediately. The media storm begins to widen. Not only does this indicate that the river was dragged to no avail and that bloodhounds were called, but it also tells us that the citizens and the police are searching for Nell. That's a significant piece of information. The citizens that are searching will become an interesting story of their own in this process. Here we see again the next day, November 23rd, in the Savannah News, so down in Georgia, searching for Nell. Hurricane Branch is the man who owns the bloodhounds. And Hurricane Branch is pretty famous in the Suffolk area and has used his bloodhounds to track down many different things, criminals and whatnot. The dogs were given the scent in Elizabeth City and turned loose, and they ended up, after running around the yard a bit, into a pier overlooking the water. Now, although this title is out of date, I wanted to include it to let you know, so even as late as January of the next year, there's still a media storm. This would have been after Wilcox had been arrested and right before his trial. But the key piece is this very last item down here, how a bloodhound solved the Nell Cropsey murder mystery, but was not believed. The Evening World is a New York newspaper. And again, this is just a very interesting, I tried to find interesting pictures that were in the newspaper. This is purportedly Hurricane Branch and his dog on the scent with the crowd watching. Again, it's a later date. This is happening in real time in November, but the story surfaces again right when Jim's going to trial, and the newspaper is full of images of it. So I thought it would be good to show you that. Significantly, the dog path is traced here in 3 different images. Again, this is from 1902, but it lets you know the media was keeping the story in the paper and keeping the information alive. And it lets you know the dog path, they go down to whatever this little thing is by the water, and then back over to what was a turnip field, and then back down the dock. So they surmise these are the 3 theories that Ella, Nell Cropsey, was either committed suicide or was thrown over there by her lover, or the very first panel is she went to the dock and was thrown in a boat and it was rowed up the river and disappeared. But significantly, all 3 stories contain the path that the dogs tracked out with her scent. Now, it was noted that only a day or 2 prior to her disappearance, Nell had gone to the dock. So they're not sure what that track actually indicates, but it's pretty interesting in real time. So while the media has already picked up the story, this is the article, I believe, that throws a lot of fuel onto the media fire. Andrew Cropsey, Nell's uncle in Brooklyn, begins with this article to feed information to the media. Now, this is the Evening World, is a local, it's a Brooklyn newspaper, New York Brooklyn newspaper, and he's giving them real-time information, including getting a letter from his daughter about what's going on. Now, the Cropsey name is a really old name in Brooklyn. It's actually believed, if you want to believe what the newspapers were saying when they talk about the Cropsey family actually moved into the Brooklyn area when it was still New Amsterdam. So even before it was New York, that's how long they had been there. Note that in the article, it says that Cropsey works at number 3 Chambers Street. That's the very first sentence, a lawyer at number 3 Chambers Street, which must be some sort of prominent law firm, because by stating where he lived or where he worked, it was information that the reader would have readily been able to translate into, oh, this is an important person. He works at number 3 Chambers Street. However, this name dropping sort of backfires, I believe, on Cropsey and the media, because now people actually have an address that they can write to Andrew Cropsey. And that begins all the bizarreness that comes afterwards. And there is a flood tide of unusual things that happen. So again, this is out of order. This is actually the burial, and a picture at when they buried Nell in Brooklyn at the Utrecht Church, the New Utrecht Cemetery. But at the bottom, the large figure by himself is Andrew Cropsey. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at him. It also shows that the media has a continued interest in the story. They've followed her now literally all the way to the grave. And the onlookers and children have gathered in the background. So it was just a sensation, people following what was going on with Nell. Well, not finding her body in the river, and after repeatedly dragging the river, it was thought that maybe she had been abducted. Stories of her being spirited away into the Dismal Swamp and held against her will developed in the media. It was rumored that local African Americans must have had an assisting hand in the abduction, and that brought the citizens out, and the Citizens Committee mentioned earlier began to search all the African American homes in the area, just barging in, searching them. Some African American men reported they had thought they had heard some oars in the oar stocks rowing a boat up the river towards the Dismal Swamp Canal. That meant that the search then spread into the actual Dismal Swamp itself, and any cabin that was readily accessible was also searched. We'll hear more about the Citizens Committee a little bit later, but looking at the media, we had the title, Nell Cropsey hid in the dismal swamp, but also the image of Nell and her sister and her cousin, cousin Carrie, which is Andrew's daughter, and her sister Alita and Ella. Again, the newspaper wouldn't get this kind of information without the family feeding that media beast. So the family's trying to use the media as well. Bloodhounds have lost track of a pretty girl. Again, here's another picture, a different picture, the Brooklyn Evelyn world of Nell. It's amazing how many different images are included of her. And again, repeating that story of her being held in the dismal swamp. And then the Atlanta Constitution. So now we've moved all the way from New York down to Atlanta in Georgia. And again, a different image of Nell. Just makes you question where they're getting these images. On November 30th, newspapers dropped 2 bombshells. The first was a letter from someone named George Hallenbach. Later, they would continue to report it as John Hallenbach, but first they reported it as George. He claims to be a day laborer who was in Elizabeth City the night that Dale disappeared, and he saw the whole thing. Now, George wrote to Uncle Andrew at his prominent location in Brooklyn that was sitting in a newspaper. And he said, look, if you will just pay my way from Philadelphia to New York, I'll be happy to report to you the entire incident and what I saw. So here we come with the craziness that comes out of the woodwork. A letter from someone he didn't know claiming that they'd seen the whole thing. The other shoe that dropped was a sighting of her on the Roanoke River. It would be the first of many such sightings that, in the media's frenzy to solve this mystery, must have been extremely painful for the family to go through. At first, Andrew thought there might be something to the Hallenbach letter, but then he began to think that maybe it was just a fraud and somebody was looking for money. Sheriff Dawson from Elizabeth City went to see if he could find out any more about the sighting that they had up on the Roanoke River. So they get the sheriff looking. You got people claiming, hey, I've seen Nell. And it only is just beginning. This is November 30th. It's the 10 days into her missing. And already people are coming out of the woodwork claiming all sorts of things. Now, rewards are starting to be offered for Nell or recovery of her body. 2 more sightings were added to the case. Both would be unsubstantiated. One said man in South Mills, and another in Plymouth. Both claimed to have seen Nell, but no, they had not. So in addition to the governor offering these monies, these people who get together as a citizens committee, they will also begin offering money. We'll hear a little more about the citizens committee in a moment. I'll get to that. This picture just fascinates me. Again, Brooklyn Daily Eagle, it must be Andrew Cropsey and the family that are feeding this paper, this newspaper, these images. Here is the Cropsey house with the veranda. If you go by now on Riverside, there's of course more trees in front of it, but this is the same house, a square tower in the center. But the caption says that this is the Cropseys and the residence, the veranda on which she was standing the night she disappeared. And it claims that the man and the woman standing up in the back are Nell and Jim. But I think, and I've tried to blow it up, it's obviously it's a newspaper picture and it's a little, dot matrixy. But if you look at the blown up image on the left, I think the man and the woman in the back, I think that's William H. Cropsey, the father. I think it's the mother. I think these are the 3 children. That's the son. And then there's a 4th child off to the left. And I think this is the uncle. They had an uncle that was living there with them in addition to Uncle Andrew that was living in Brooklyn. I think this is actually just the Cropsey family, and Jim is not in that picture. It would make sense that they were out standing in front of their house. So the Baltimore Sun, Wilcox is arrested. The big mass meeting in this is the Citizens Committee that I keep mentioning. So we're 12 days into it, and the citizens decide that everything is not moving fast enough for them, and they're going to get a committee together, and they're going to help the sheriff, and they're going to help the investigation. They're going to give him resources, money. They're going to give him people, and they form a committee of 5 to run this assistance to the sheriff. They're meeting as an extra legal body. He didn't ask for their help. And in fact, by the end of it, they become embroiled with each other and are at loggerheads because he hasn't approved anything they've done. A Brooklyn paper this same day carries a follow-up story to the Hollenbach letter. And there's a man named C.A. Wellenbach who called Andrew Cropsey on the phone and spoke with him to clear his name. While Wallenbach had Elizabeth City ties, he was not in Elizabeth City on the day in question. He thinks that the similarity of the name as a letter that was signed by Hallenbach may have caused some confusion and pulled him into the story that he didn't want any part of. The letter from Philadelphia is concluded finally to be a fraud. Cropsey had sent word to Philadelphia that if anyone came up to the train station looking for a ticket that he allegedly was going to supply, that person should be arrested and questioned by the police for his knowledge about the whereabouts of Nell. No one ever showed up that day. So this is also the New York World. The Citizens Committee formed, more than 700 prominent people came together. The building is still there in downtown. It was a music academy at the time. And that's where everyone met. The 5 men that were chose to lead the committee were all prominent men. One had been a classmate of Wilcox's, Mr. Turner. But there was one prominent citizen who didn't make the cut, who didn't become part of the Citizens Committee, and that was Judge Isaac Meekins. He became later the district court judge of Eastern District Court and an important figure in Elizabeth City, and not just because we share a last name. Judge Ike is distantly related to me. I think his grandfather and my ancestor were brothers. But it's interesting, the only quote I found in the whole Cropsey case that involved Ike Meekins was this quote, where he says that he wanted the committee to go into the work undeterred in any way. And if they decided to, he was willing to see any of the money that he contributed spent for tar and feathers. He didn't want to prejudice anybody or anything or incite the people to a riot. And he hoped they wouldn't do anything that wasn't a credit to the community. But nonetheless, he threw out tars and feathers. When they first arrested Wilcox, there was talk of lynching as well, but calmer heads prevailed. So here we go. We've already seen the report of 3 sightings of young ladies they thought were Nell. And here in the Evening World, the New York paper again, is a report, police hold a girl who they believe is Ella Cropsey. This was in Norfolk, and they received a dispatch. The paper report was from Norfolk, but the dispatch was from Wilson. Now this is going to be, this young lady is an interesting story, and we'll hear, I think, a little bit more about her. She's first detained, her and the man she's traveling with, and they identify themselves as Mackie Durham, and I'll come back to, or McKay Durham. I'll come back to him in a minute. But so here we have a story of a girl kidnapped, not kidnapped, but a sighting of Nell, and the police are holding them for questioning. So Uncle Andrew had waited at the terminal of the Jersey City on the word that someone had for sure spotted Nell there. One of the men that worked at the terminal said he for certain knew that she was there. So yet another sighting of Nell, this time actually in Jersey, but he obviously waited in vain. The people thought to be Nell were later described as a man, T.B. Murdoch, and his niece. They had traveled up that way together, and I guess had drawn suspicion because it was a young lady with an older man. She somewhat looked like Nell, and the media ran with the story, you know, hey, we've seen Nell here. So the lady identified in Wilson and Hell, like I said, was identified by Mr. and Mrs. Mackey Durham. The woman seemed a little hesitant and very secretive, and that aroused even more suspicion. When interviewed by the police, she didn't have a lot to say, and she matched Nell's general description very well. Could it have actually be that they had Nell? So while they were detained and questioned, it was determined that the young lady couldn't be Nell, and the reason being that Nell had a really nice set of teeth, and this young lady did not. So this is one of those stories of a very mixed fortune. Again, get the family excited. They might have found Nell, and they didn't. But it also has consequences for the people who were detained. So the Durhams received an apology from the Wilson police, and they paid their way to their next station, which they were coming to Raleigh by train. And somewhere between the time they got on the train and left and the train arriving at Selma in Johnson County, the police chief in Wilson received a communication from Georgia that Durham was a known horse thief, and he'd run off with a young lady, and he was wanted for extradition back to Georgia. And so when the train arrived in Selma and the Durhams got off the train, they were arrested again. And bless her heart, the young lady didn't say what her fate was, but Mr. Durham was sent off to Georgia to, I guess, determine his fate. Even more weirdness. We started having sightings of Nell everywhere, a living Nell, and now we're starting to get in the newspaper sightings of Nell, dead Nells. They've said a second body had been found in the Cropsey inquest. 2 reports of bodies washed up on shore on the Pasquotank River. Off in an isolated place, fishermen had seen something that looked like a body from their boat, and instead of going over and investigating, they came back with the sensational tale that they'd seen the body of Nell, and all they had to do was go downriver and recover her. But when people went downriver, there were no bodies at all. So once again, rumor, sightings, findings, but no Nell. A wild goose chase. So we've had letters about Nell, and we've had sightings, live sightings in several different locations. We've had 2 dead bodies. And on December 6th, a clairvoyant shows up in Elizabeth City, and she says she knows undoubtedly where Nell is. Her body is in a nearby well. She's dead, but body's been stuffed in a nearby well. The clairvoyant says, just take me around and I'll show you. So the committee of 5 usher her around. They spend the whole day traveling some 20 miles looking for every well they could find in the area. And they found a couple, but neither one had the body of Nell in it. So once again, the family's hopes are built up. You've had bloodhounds, we had sightings, we've had dead bodies, we've had letters saying that she was in places. Now we've had a clairvoyant. I can't imagine the emotional wringer that the family is going through every time, you know, they're just trying to get their feet under them. It adds another layer of bizarre to the story. So the chief of police in Norfolk answers and is positive that Nell is alive and well. And he bases all of this on the faith he has in a young man who says that he purchased Nell's ticket for her to Baltimore. So that gets around the money issue, because Nell was said not to have any money. How could she be traveling? Well, this man said, and he was an acquaintance of Nell's, said that he had bought her a ticket and sent her on to Baltimore. But in Baltimore, the police can't find her. They can't find that she ever arrived. They can't find her in a boarding house. They can't find anyone under an assumed name. And then the family states, it just can't possibly be her, because in addition to not having money for a ticket, even if you explain that, the clothes that she was wearing were completely different from what Nell had on her person that night, and were different from anything that Nell had in her wardrobe. And again, without any money, not even, her sister says, 5 cents in her pocket, how could she afford a new wardrobe? Even in the face of all of that, the chief of police at Norfolk is adamant that Nell's alive, and he knows he can prove it. December 8th, although the newspaper's the next day, 9th, they're still searching for Nell. And although the opinion is that she was abducted or murdered, here again at the very end of the story is there's another reported sighting, this time in Wilmington, North Carolina, of a girl, but then it's not credited as being Nell, but it's reported nonetheless. News media has got to keep that story up, keep it going, keep it. Well, finally, after the Norfolk chief of police statement, Villines, pardon me, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Vellins, Villines, chief of police in Norfolk, had reported undoubtedly in the newspaper and in several newspapers over several days that he knew Nell to be alive and that he could find her. Andrew Cropsey is livid. He sends a telegram to the chief and asks him to explain himself. And the chief waits a day and then finally sends a response. I don't have anything for sure. Nothing sure. And that just sends Andrew Cropsey over the edge. And he writes a letter to the chief of police in Elizabeth City, Chief Dawson. And he hands a copy of the letter to the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, so he makes sure it's published in real time so the chief has nowhere to go. They can't get out from under the media scrutiny of the comments. And basically, Cropsey is saying, you got to get a handle on the news media, on the police force, all these different people, and such craziness and crazy things like the chief in Norfolk saying he knew for sure that she was alive, or that these sightings are reported in the newspaper. You need to get ahead of all of this. You need to put a throttle on it and keep the newspapers from publishing these things that have no merit. And what could Chief Dawson do? I mean, he had that authority. There was no way he could stop it. And the media was, man, they were happy to have it. Just as Andrew is using it to boost his case, I mean, the media is selling papers. The Cropsey family had had enough. I think this is the turning point, and in the media coverage up to this point, they have been holding out hope that Nell was alive. But after this, they start believing that Nell is just dead. Once too often, their hopes have been crushed. And so here we see confirmation of that. The family says that, Nell's dead. It's been 21 days since she vanished. Hope has faded beyond recovery. The media has played a part and is responsible for that. And those seeking fame just being connected to the case, like the Hollenbach letter, just wanting a share of whatever that media blitz. Even in early 1902, when Hurricane Branch, one of the 2 dogs that worked the Cropsey case, died, it's reported in the news media that he lost a dog that worked the Cropsey case. So it just has taken a throttle hold and everyone wants to be a part of it. But now the family is turning towards, after 21 days, believing that she is passed away. So then the media reports that a shirtwaist, a piece of clothing, a red shirtwaist that may have belonged to Nell, is found washed up on the banks of the river. Although it's not positively identified, they're still sort of feeding that storm. A sad clue about Nell. After that, and after all that the family has been through, all the media turns and twists that are coming up, the father of Nell makes a public comment that he holds Wilcox accountable for her loss. And this is a big media day. There are 3 big, juicy media stories that break. This is the first one. Wilcox is accused by the father and that he's responsible. And he thought that if he would, Jim could clear the matter up in as little as 20 minutes. And now he makes that belief known to the media, and that's out there. The second thing, Justice Cropsey speaks again, but in this article, the Citizens Committee hires a detective to work the case. So in addition to the police, and in addition to the Citizens Committee, in addition to Andrew Cropsey, now they're going to hire a detective named Edward Kelly to ask questions about the case. And Kelly goes over to the Cropsey house to interview the family. And Uncle Andrew is down, he's visiting, and he's there at the time. And as Kelly begins his questioning, he starts to say some unsavory things about Nell's character, things that were brought up as innuendo in the Norfolk newspapers, to the point where Uncle Andrew finally got so upset that he almost came to physical blows with Kelly. He would not have Nell's character defamed by the news media, by the Norfolk police. He was already angry with the sheriff, and now he was ready to have fisticuffs with this detective. So the Citizens Committee claimed to have found a tangible clue, again, sort of stoking the fires of the mystery. They said they have a clue, and once it pans out, the whole mystery will be solved, but they refuse to state what the clue is, of course. So in response to William Cropsey's accusations, Wilcox makes a statement. Now, Jim has been pretty tight-lipped in the newspapers. At first, he was fairly free with his comments. He'd been interviewed. He was interviewed by the sheriff, by the justices of the court, or the justices of the peace of the town. He'd gone to interview with the family. He made statements in the newspapers, but he grew tired of repeating himself, and he grew tired of the constant attention, but he could not refute what he'd been accused of. And so he tries to, in this statement, correct any number of those things. And the media is laughing it up. And this time it's a local newspaper, but it makes the coverage everywhere. Cropsey rails against Wilcox and the media for publishing Jim's statement. He didn't like it at all. Wilcox's dad also takes exception, saying that the people seemed a whole lot more concerned with finding his son guilty than finding the young lady. Now, Jim's dad was the ex-sheriff of Pasquotank County. Wilcox doesn't take to the woods, as is indicated here in this sensational title for a news story. He does, however, prudently go to the south of Pasquotank County and a family farm down there. So he would be less in the public's attention. He is there and can be retrieved at any time. The sheriff knows where he is, so he's not running away. Nonetheless, the newspapers make a big deal, as we see here, out of Jim taking to the woods to be hiding. So December 18th, 28 days in, if you're counting, the Citizens Committee finally admits that their clue did not pan out. And now they don't know what to do nor whither to turn. 28 days and no clue. But even that is newsworthy, and the media loved it. Coverage continued, parties exchanging statements in the press, no Nell, no body, and then bingo. We have another Nell sighting, this time in Rocky Mount. The Committee of Five sends a couple men out to check. Of course, it turns out to be false. And then a bizarre turn in the media. I first find it in the Goldsboro Argus newspaper on the right, suspicions Cropsey. So it's claimed that Nell's father purportedly forged the Rocky Mount letter saying that Nell was in Rocky Mount, and that the Citizens Committee have caught him in several falsehoods in connection with the matter. It just seems incredible. And then that's followed up a few days later by the Raleigh Standard repeating that same story, that Cropsey has secreted himself and his daughter, and the community is in the throes of sympathetic agony. So they're accusing the father now in the media. Well, you might sort of get the feeling that the Cropseys are not one to sit around and wait for the media to eat them alive. And William H. Cropsey is not that kind of man either. He immediately says, I don't know where this is coming from, but if I find out, I'm going to sue the heck out of him. And he doesn't use heck. He uses other language, a little saltier. So he's trying to put that to rest. It just seems to have been created out of whole cloth. Now, I know the date seems odd, but let me explain. This story carries a lot of information. The letter was published in the New York papers in its entirety, including the name of the person who is stated to have committed the crime, and it is not Wilcox. And the letter I'm talking about is the last paragraph. A new witness hails from Utica, New York. It's the Utica letter. This actually, in 1903, is after his second trial. And in that time period that Wilcox is written to, or Wilcox lawyers are written to by this person from Utica, New York. And at the same time, that letter is printed in its entirety in a New York newspaper. Unfortunately, that edition of that New York newspaper is not extant. So have some problems with it. Can't find the whole story. But what is astounding is when this breaks in 1903, Cropsey admits that he had received multiple letters from this person in Utica, including one on December 23rd, which fits with our timeline, that included a pen and ink sketch of where Nell's body could be found. And the thing is, the pen and ink sketch was completely accurate. That is where, in 4 days, they would find Nell's body. Whether he brought this to Sheriff Dawson's attention or not, or whether they just dismissed it as another series of letters because they'd already been getting crazy letters from people, you know, the media storm has played a hand into jaundicing their information. And by this time, they're already convinced Wilcox is the guy. And he's been arrested for the crime, and he's going to be standing trial for it, and that sort of thing. So they just know that's true. But he never shared those letters. Cropsey never did. And of course, by 1901, at this point, again, he's convinced that Wilcox is guilty, and the letters would have thrown him on another lead, so he didn't do that. So this is the Logansport Morning Journal, an Indiana newspaper that's a picture of the Pasquotank River out in front of the Cropsey house in the background. And that's William Cropsey with his hat. And if you remember the earlier picture of the man standing behind the people who had a hat on, that's why I think that's William. Nell and an image of James. So it's amazing that this is an Indiana newspaper that has this level of detail in these images. So here's that same photo, just a little clearer from the newspaper that I captured it from. And this is in Oregon. So even as far as the West Coast, they are carrying this mystery and they have this level of details. Then on December 27th, they find Nell's body there at the docks, not too far off. And again, it's not quite the path that the dogs, but I thought it interesting. This is the Evening World. They have a good image of the house, kind of poor image of Jim Wilcox, and yet a different image of Nell than we've seen in other papers. But the media is still feeding off of this. The next day, an image of Nell in the New York World. And we're almost finished here. Another image of Nell and Jim in the New York World. I mean, the media is fascinated that these two and this story is covered. And then one more last piece of media blitz. We saw earlier the scene of the burial with Andrew Cropsey in the bottom picture and all the little children. And here it is again at a different angle in the old Van Pelt Manor Cemetery, which is the new Utrecht Church Cemetery. So there is more media coverage. As I showed you hints of in 1902 and 1903, there's a trial in Elizabeth City. There's a Supreme Court judgment. There's a new trial in Perquimans. And then the media keeps covering it. Jim begins asking for pardons almost immediately. And, within, say, 10 or 15 years, a lot of the major players, like the Citizens Committee, have passed away. And every time one dies, they say, oh, it was part of the Nell Cropsey case. So it still sort of lingers in the imagination, and the media is still feeding off of it. Okay, that's all I got. I'll try to answer some questions now, and I thank you for listening patiently and being patient with me, and I hope that wasn't too rough.
So if there are any questions, if you will go to the bottom of your screen and you will just take your cursor across the bottom, there should be a Q&A. And yes, we do have one question. Any evidence from her body of how she died?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. The body was recovered from the water. The main medical doctor who was performing the autopsy had never performed an autopsy on a drowned victim. And although he went into excruciating detail and had a team of doctors with him, they, I think, missed some things when they were doing the autopsy. And so the conclusion of the autopsy was that she died from a blow to the head and not from drowning, because they found no water in her lungs, which would have been consistent with being knocked out prior to being in the water. So the contusion on her head and then not finding water in her lungs, but I believe that was the medical conclusion that came out in the trial.
Okay. Chris, we got one more question coming in. Drowned or dumped in the river?
Yeah, that's the mystery, isn't it? Did she jump in on her own, or was she placed in the water? And they built the most incredible circumstantial case they could build against Wilcox, but I still don't even think they passed, in my opinion, the muster for circumstantial evidence. his actions could be explained away and other actions could be attributed to people. So that I don't think they tied him as closely as they felt like they had to the case. I think ultimately that's why he gets a pardon. But it's forever hung around his neck until he commits suicide. So yeah, that's the bottom line. Did she jump in the water? Was she dead a long time, before she was in the water? Was she in the water for those 30 some odd days? Hard to tell.
So do we have more questions from anyone? I think at the bottom of your screen, if everybody is good, there's somewhere that there is, you can give thumbs up. But also too, I'm going to get ready and I'm going to launch the poll. So we'll give that a minute or two for everyone to answer. But I do have another question to come through.
Okay.
Did James have another girlfriend?
If he did, it didn't really make the media coverage that I saw. So, or the trial that I remember from reading material. James and Nell were in a complicated relationship that was ending and had been ending for a few months, evidently. And there were times when he would ask her to go out and she wouldn't, and he would take her cousin. But it was not like they were dating. It was more, I guess, Jim just trying to get her to be interested in him again. But there were many months of a complicated relationship there. It's odd because when you read the newspapers, you hear statements from the grandmothers and those sorts of things in New York who said that they had met Jim like 3 or 4 years earlier when he had come up to New York with her on a visit to meet all of the family. So they were fairly serious at some point that he would travel all the way up there. The other thing is Nell's age is never quite reported correctly in the newspapers. She's a little older, I think, than the 17 and the 19 that they report her to be. Why else would he go to New York? He wouldn't go there with a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old. It would make sense.
Okay. We do have another question. Let's see here. Oh, congratulations on your new position from Mrs. Barbara Snowden.
Thank you, Barbara.
It's funny, we had that conversation before we got started. Let me see.
Yes.
Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
No, that's for maybe folks that didn't hear it. I work for historical publication and research, which is, to steal a line from the Jeffersons, I moved on up to the east side. I used to be in the basement on the west end of the building. Now I'm on the mezzanine on the east end of the building. So I've got my piece of the pie on the east end of the building now.
Let's see here. I think that is all of the questions we have right now. Again, we would like to thank Chris. Oh, hold on, Chris. We just had another question to come through. Did her father hate Jim for any reason other than blaming him for whatever happened?
No, I mean, not that has come out in any of the testimony. Uh-oh, I seem to be spinning.
You froze for just a minute. Give us just a minute and for Chris to come. There he goes. These technical difficulties do happen. So while we're waiting for Chris to come back, if I could, what I would like to do is to let everyone know that we do have another History for Lunch scheduled for this month. It will be on June the 17th at noon, and we will have Dr. Matthew Burton from North Carolina State joining us, and his talk's going to be The Truth About Asian Giant Hornets. So we will be posting hopefully today the link that you can register for the program. And so just be looking for that. You can find the links on our social media and sites that we participate in, and you can also find them on our website. But we will be putting that information out as soon as possible that we can. I'm not sure if Chris is still with us or not. Let me check.
I am.
Okay, here we go. He's coming back so we can get that question answered.
Okay.
So, or do you just, Chris, your name is up, but not your video. Do you just want to go ahead and answer the question?
Yeah. So Jim said many times in the newspaper that he was very intimate with the family and on excellent terms with them right up until this moment. So other than Nell's disappearance, it seemed like Jim was in good. I mean, he went to New York with them to visit their family. He was there for the better part of the 3 to 4 years that he courted Nell. So the father had no issues with him, at least not as reported in the newspapers or in the trial that came later, or 2 trials. So I would say the answer to that was no.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just going to double check one more time on questions, but there has been there's just a second there. Let me check the chat for 1 second. Now I just had the comment that it was an excellent presentation. Well, I've had 2 comments. Excellent presentation, and they're looking forward to the next one. So again, Chris, we want to thank you for joining us today all the way from Raleigh and taking the time to spend with us putting this presentation together, because as always, Nell is a very popular subject.
Well, thank everybody for your patience. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Again, we will be posting this presentation as soon as possible, as soon as we can get it up online. I think we have corrected all the technical difficulties we had from the last presentation we did, and we just ask that everybody will please join us again on June the 17th as we talk about the Asian hornet. Again, thank you, Chris. Thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Thanks for hosting.
Have a great day.